My grandson came home with his shoes soaked through, and he wouldn't tell me why. Before we begin, let me introduce myself properly, because you're going to need to understand exactly who I am for the rest of this story to make sense. My name is Eleanor Hargrove. I am 68 years old, and for 34 years, I served in the United States Army. I retired at the rank of Major General, the second highest rank a general officer can hold, and one of the few women of my generation to reach 2 stars. I commanded logistics divisions in 3 theaters. I sat in rooms with 4-star generals and congressional committees and did not blink. I buried soldiers who were younger than my own children. I know what it means to carry weight that other people cannot see. I tell you this not to impress you. I tell you this because a school principal named Gerald Whitfield looked at my 11-year-old grandson last month, saw a boy in a jacket with a broken zipper, and decided he already knew everything he needed to know about our family. He was wrong. And he was about to find out exactly how wrong. This is a fictional story with names, places, and events changed for privacy, but the pattern in it is real. And if you have ever watched someone in power write off a child because of what he doesn't have, you already know why I'm telling it. Welcome to my house. Sit down, I'll make coffee. This is going to take a while. That night is where this story really begins, so let me slow down and tell it properly. My grandson's name is Tyler. He is 11 years old, in the 6th grade, and he lives with me now, has for the past year, since his mother, Rachel, my daughter, took a second job on the night shift at a distribution warehouse, outside of town to keep the lights on. Rachel is proud. Too proud some days to accept help even from her own mother. But when it came to Tyler, she didn't argue when I said, bring him to me on weekdays. I have the room. I have the time. And frankly, I have more patience left in me than most people my age, because the Army does not let you retire from patience. Tyler is a quiet boy, not shy exactly, thoughtful. He likes to take things apart and put them back together. Old radios, broken clocks, a toaster that hadn't worked in years until he got his hands on it. He reminds me of my late husband, Walter, who could fix anything with wire and stubbornness. Tyler has Walter's hands and Rachel's eyes. And when he smiles, which used to be often, the whole room gets a little lighter. That Tuesday in March, he came home from Ridgemont Middle School with his shoes soaked through, not from rain, because it hadn't rained, and mud on the back of his jacket, and he went straight up to his room without saying a word. I have raised one daughter and helped raise a grandson, and before that I supervised thousands of young soldiers who were, in every way that matters, somebody's child too. I know the difference between a boy who had a bad day and a boy who is hiding something. Tyler was hiding something. I gave him 20 minutes. Then I knocked on his door with a plate of crackers and cheese, which was as much an excuse as a snack, and sat down on the edge of his bed. You want to tell me what happened to your shoes? He shrugged, staring at the wall. Nothing, I fell. Where? By the bike racks. Somebody push you? Silence. That silence told me more than any answer could have. Tyler, look at me. He looked at me. His eyes were red-rimmed, like he'd been crying and trying very hard to stop before I saw. 11-year-old boys learn early that crying gets you called soft. And Tyler had learned it faster than most, because he'd had less room to be soft than other kids his age. There's a boy, he finally said. Braxton. Him and his friends. They said, he stopped. They said what? They said I smell like a gas station. Because of my jacket. Because it's from the church closet. His voice cracked on the last word. They said I'm poor. They said I shouldn't even be at Ridgemont, that it's not for kids like me. I sat very still because if I had let my face show what I was feeling in that moment, I would have frightened him. And what happened by the bike racks? They took my backpack, threw it in the mud. When I tried to get it, Braxton pushed me down. Everybody laughed. He wiped his nose with his sleeve. I didn't tell the teacher. It doesn't matter. Nobody does anything anyway. Why do you say that? Because it's happened before, Grandma. Since September. I told Mr. Daniels, that's the gym teacher, in October. Nothing happened. Braxton's dad gave the school a new scoreboard. Everybody knows that. Everybody knows you don't mess with Braxton. I want you to sit with that sentence for a moment, the way I had to sit with it. An 11-year-old boy had already learned, in one semester of middle school, that money buys immunity, that a scoreboard with a family name engraved on it was worth more to the adults in charge than his safety. I did not learn that lesson until I was much older, and it took me longer to unlearn it. Tyler had absorbed it before he'd even finished growing his adult teeth. "Okay," I said, keeping my voice level, the way I used to when a briefing went sideways and 40 people were looking to me to decide what happened next. "Thank you for telling me. You're not in trouble. None of this is your fault. Do you understand that?" He nodded, not quite believing it. "I'm going to handle this. Grandma, please don't call the school. It'll just make it worse. Braxton's mom is friends with Principal Whitfield. Everybody says so." That was the second thing that told me exactly what kind of situation I was walking into. Not that a rich family had influence. That happens everywhere, and it's not new. It was that an 11-year-old already understood, with total clarity, that the adults meant to protect him were compromised, and that speaking up would cost him more than staying silent. I have spent my whole career in institutions where rank and money can bend the rules if nobody stops them. I built my career on making sure they didn't. I was not about to let a middle school principal do to my grandson what I'd spent 3 decades preventing in uniform. "I'm not going to call," I told him. "I'm going to go in person. Tomorrow morning. They won't listen to you either." I smiled at him then, the first real smile I'd managed since he walked in with wet shoes. "Sweetheart, they don't know who's coming." Once Tyler was finally asleep, I did the next thing I knew I had to do. I called my daughter. I waited until Tyler was asleep, then I called my daughter. Rachel picked up on the second ring, her voice thick with exhaustion. She'd just finished a 10-hour shift and was driving home. "Mom, is everything okay?" "Is Tyler?" "He's fine. He's asleep. But we need to talk about school." I told her everything. The shoes, the backpack in the mud, Braxton, the months of silence, the gym teacher who'd done nothing. I heard her breath catch on the other end of the line. Then the particular quiet that comes right before someone starts to cry in a car they can't afford to pull over in. "I knew something was wrong," she said finally. "He's been so quiet. I thought it was just, I don't know, missing me. I'm gone so much, Mom. I thought that was it." "This isn't your fault, Rachel." I emailed the school in October about something similar, some kid mocking his shoes. I got a form response. "We take all concerns about student well-being seriously." Then nothing. Her voice hardened. I didn't push it because I didn't have time to fight a school district while working 2 jobs to keep him in that district. I understood that exhaustion. I had lived a version of it myself, decades earlier, as a young single mother in uniform trying to balance deployments with a daughter who needed her home. The world does not make room for parents who are already stretched thin. It expects them to stretch thinner. "I'm going in tomorrow," I said. 9 a.m. I want you to know before I do it. Because I'm not asking permission, but I respect you too much to blindside you. There was a pause. Then Rachel said something that told me everything about how tired she'd become, and how much she'd started to accept things she shouldn't have to accept. "Mom, please don't make a scene. I need Tyler to stay at that school. It's the only decent public school in our zone. If you go in there and it turns into a fight, they'll just make things harder for him. People like Whitfield don't like being challenged. I've seen how he looks at us at pickup, like we're inconveniencing him just by existing there." "I'm not going to make a scene," I said. "I'm going to have a conversation. If Mr. Whitfield conducts himself professionally, that's exactly what it will be. But Rachel, I need you to trust me on something. I am not going in there as an angry grandmother he can dismiss with a form letter. I am going to walk into that office in a way that makes it very difficult for him to condescend to me. I've spent 34 years learning how rooms like that work. Let me use it." Another pause, longer this time. "What does that mean?" "It means get some sleep." "I've got this." She didn't ask again. She trusted me, she always has, even when she didn't fully understand what I meant. That trust is the whole reason this story ends the way it does. So hold on to it because it matters later. After I hung up with Rachel, I sat alone in my kitchen for a long while. Then I got up and did something I hadn't done in almost 6 years. After I hung up with Rachel, I went to my closet and stood in front of a garment bag I had not opened in almost 6 years. Inside it was my Army service uniform, the formal one. The one I wore to change of command ceremonies, to Pentagon briefings, to the funeral of a colonel I'd served with for 2 decades. Deep blue, precisely tailored, with the insignia of a major general on the shoulders, 2 silver stars, unmistakable to anyone who has ever spent time around a military installation, and unmistakable in a different way to anyone who hasn't, because there is something about that uniform, worn correctly, that makes people stand a little straighter without knowing why. I am not a vain woman. I did not become a general because I wanted people to be impressed by fabric and stars. I earned that uniform one deployment, one promotion board, one impossible decision at a time, over 3.5 decades, in rooms where I was very often the only woman and very often the youngest one there before I was the most senior one there. But I understood something about Gerald Whitfield before I'd ever met him, just from what Tyler and Rachel had told me. Men like that respond to authority. Not to reason first, to authority first, and reason only after the authority has made them uncomfortable enough to listen. I had sat across from men like him in oversight, hearings and supply chain negotiations. I knew exactly how this would need to go. I was not going to walk into Ridgemont Middle School as somebody's grandmother, easily filed away as an emotional old woman making a fuss over nothing. I was going to walk in as Major General Eleanor Hargrove, United States Army, retired, and I was going to make Gerald Whitfield understand, within about 90 seconds of opening my mouth, that he had badly misjudged who he was dealing with. I took the uniform out of the bag, checked the ribbons were in the correct order. You'd be amazed how many civilians assume a uniform is just decoration, when every single element of it is a small, precise record of a life, and hung it on the back of my bedroom door. Then I sat down at my kitchen table with a legal pad, the same kind I'd used for 30 years to plan logistics for entire brigades, and I began to write down exactly what I intended to say, and exactly what I intended to demand. I did not sleep much that night, but it wasn't fear keeping me awake. It was the particular, focused clarity that used to come over me, the night before a difficult mission, the sense of a plan, falling into place piece by piece, until there was nothing left to do but execute it. At 5:30 in the morning, I got up, made coffee, and got dressed. The next morning, I put that uniform on for the first time in years, and I want to tell you exactly what it felt like walking into that building. Ridgemont Middle School sits on the edge of Ashford Hills, a town that likes to think of itself as a community, but is really a collection of very different worlds stitched together by a single zip code. On one end are homes with circular driveways and landscaping crews. On the other end are apartment complexes where families like ours, like Rachel and Tyler, work 2 jobs to make rent and still show up to every parent-teacher conference. They can manage. The school itself is beautiful, I'll give it that. Brick and glass, a new gymnasium with Coleman, Family Athletic Center engraved over the door in gold letters, the first sign, though I did not yet know it, of exactly how deep this went. I parked my car at 8:50 in the morning and sat for a moment, looking at myself in the rearview mirror. 68 years old, silver hair cut short and practical the way it had been since 1988, 2 stars on my shoulders that I had earned through more sacrifice than most civilians ever witness in a lifetime. I got out of the car. I want to describe walking across that parking lot because it mattered. I did not walk quickly. I did not walk angrily. I walked the way I was trained to walk into any room where I needed to be taken seriously immediately, spine straight, shoulders back, gait unhurried, eyes forward. It is a posture that says, without a single word, I am not here to be managed. I am here to be dealt with. A woman dropping her daughter off near the entrance stopped mid-sentence and stared. A man in a tracksuit walking toward the gym actually slowed his pace. I heard someone murmur, Is she a general? Behind me, and I did not turn around, because that reaction was exactly what I had planned for, and there was no reason to acknowledge it yet. I walked through the front doors of Ridgemont Middle School at exactly 8:57 in the morning, and the front office went quiet the moment I stepped inside. Behind the reception desk sat a woman in her 40s with a lanyard and a look of pure, startled confusion, like she was trying to work out whether she was supposed to salute me or call security. Neither, as it turned out, was necessary. "Good morning," I said. "My name is Major General Eleanor Hargrove, United States Army, retired. I'm here to see Principal Whitfield. It's regarding my grandson, Tyler Hargrove." She blinked twice. Do you have an appointment?" "No," I said pleasantly, "but I think you'll find he has time for me." Before I tell you what was said in that office, let me tell you who I was sitting across from, because it matters for everything that came after. Here is what I want you to understand about Gerald Whitfield before I describe our conversation, because I think it explains everything that came after. Gerald Whitfield had been the principal of Ridgemont Middle School for 11 years. In that time, according to what I later learned, he had overseen the construction of the Coleman Family Athletics Center, funded largely by a 6-figure donation from Marcus Coleman, Braxton's father, a commercial real estate developer with 3 other properties in Ashford Hills and, not coincidentally, a seat on the district's private fundraising committee. Whitfield was not a stupid man. He understood in the particular way that career administrators understand exactly which families made his job easier and which families made his job, in his mind, harder. Families like ours, a single mother working double shifts, a grandmother raising a child part-time, did not sit on fundraising committees. We did not fund athletic centers. We showed up to conferences exhausted and left quickly because we had to get back to work. And somewhere along the way, in 100 small decisions nobody would ever write down, Gerald Whitfield had decided that our concerns mattered less. He kept me waiting for 11 minutes. I know because I counted, and because 11 minutes is exactly the amount of time a man makes someone wait when he wants them to understand. Without saying it, who has the power in the building? When the receptionist finally led me back to his office, Whitfield was seated behind a wide oak desk, in a room lined with framed photographs of himself shaking hands with various local dignitaries at ribbon cuttings. He did not stand when I entered. That was his second mistake. His first had been keeping me waiting at all. He looked up, took in the uniform. I watched it land, watched something shift behind his eyes, a small flicker of recalculation, and then composed his face into a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Mrs. Hargrove, is it? I understand you're here about your grandson." "General Hargrove," I said, taking the seat across from him without being invited to, because I had decided in the car that I would not ask permission for anything in that room. "And yes, I'm here about Tyler." Of course. Now I want you to know, we take every concern about student well-being very seriously here at Ridgemont." "Mr. Whitfield," I said, cutting him off, not rudely, but with the flat, unhurried authority of someone who has ended 100 meetings that were about to waste her time. I've heard that sentence before. My daughter received it in an email in October. I'd like us to skip past it, if you don't mind, and talk about what's actually happening to my grandson. His smile faltered slightly. Of course. What exactly is the concern?" "The concern," I said, "is that for 6 months, a student named Braxton Coleman and a group of his friends have been physically and verbally targeting Tyler because his family does not have money. Yesterday, they threw his backpack in the mud and shoved him to the ground in front of witnesses. This is not the first incident. It was reported to a member of your staff in October. Nothing was done." Whitfield's hands folded on the desk in front of him, a gesture I recognized instantly, the posture of a man preparing to manage a situation rather than solve it. "General Hargrove, I understand you're upset. And as a grandmother, that's completely understandable. But I have to be careful about how we characterize things. Kids that age, there's a lot of roughhousing, a lot of he said, she said. Braxton is a good kid. His family has done a great deal for this school. I'd hate to see a misunderstanding turn into something bigger than it needs to be." There it was. Exactly what I had expected. Laid out in plain language. A good kid. A family that's done a great deal for this school. Weigh that against my grandson and see which side of the scale Whitfield had already decided was heavier before I'd even sat down. "Mr. Whitfield," I said, "let me be very clear about something, because I don't think you understand who you're speaking to. And I would like to correct that before we go any further. He tried to interrupt. I did not let him. I spent 34 years in the United States Army. I have commanded logistics for combat divisions across 3 continents. I have sat across tables from generals, senators, and foreign ministers. And I have never once accepted the phrase, "Let's not make this bigger than it needs to be," as an answer to a child being physically assaulted. Do you understand what that phrase actually means? When you say it to a grandmother whose grandson came home with mud in, his hair and his backpack ruined, it means you have already decided the outcome of this conversation before it started. It means you have already decided that a boy whose family funded your gymnasium matters more than a boy whose grandmother had to take unpaid leave from nothing, because she doesn't have a job to take leave from anymore, to come sit in this office and make you do yours. The room was very quiet. I watched Whitfield's jaw tighten. I resent the implication that money has anything to do with how we treat students here, he said stiffly. Then you won't mind pulling the incident reports, I said. Because my daughter emailed a complaint on October the 14th. There should be a written record of that email, and a written record of any follow-up action taken. I would like to see both, please. Whitfield's composure cracked, just slightly, just for a second. But I have spent decades reading the faces of men trying to hide something, and I saw exactly what I needed to see. I'll have to check with the front office, he said. Records like that aren't always immediately... Mr. Whitfield. My voice did not rise. It did not need to. I did not spend 3 decades learning to read a room to be told that a public school, funded by taxpayer money, cannot locate a written complaint from 4 months ago about a child's physical safety. I would like those records within the hour, and I would like to understand exactly what disciplinary action, if any, has been taken against Braxton Coleman in that time. He stared at me for a long moment. Then, very quietly, he said, "There's been no formal disciplinary action against Braxton? None?" There was a conversation. With his parents, informally. An informal conversation, I repeated. With his parents. About their son shoving another child into the mud. On multiple documented occasions, over 6 months. General Hargrove, I want you to understand. No, I said. I want you to understand something, Mr. Whitfield. And I want you to understand it very clearly, because I'm not going to say it twice. My grandson is 11 years old. He has already learned in 1 semester at your school that money buys protection and poverty buys silence. He learned that from watching you fail to act. I did not survive 34 years of service, did not bury friends, did not earn these stars on my shoulder, to come home and watch a public school administrator teach my grandson. That same lesson before, he's even old enough to shave. I let that sit in the room for a moment. So here is what is going to happen, I continued. You are going to pull every record related to my daughter's October complaint and any subsequent incidents involving Tyler and Braxton Coleman. You are going to open a formal investigation, documented in writing today. And you are going to explain to me, specifically, why a documented physical assault on an 11-year-old boy resulted in nothing more than an informal chat, when I suspect if the situation were reversed, if my grandson had shoved Braxton Coleman into the mud, the outcome would have looked very different. Whitfield's face had gone from pale to faintly red. Are you accusing me of favoritism, General? I am telling you what I observe, I said. You can draw your own conclusions about what to call it. There was a long silence. Outside his office window, I could see students moving between classes, unaware of the conversation happening. A few feet away that was about to determine whether one of them would finally be safe in his own school. I'll need to speak with the district, Whitfield finally said, his voice tighter now, the polish gone from it. This is a serious allegation. Good, I said, standing. While you do that, I'm going to ask you for something else. I want a list of every staff member on duty, in the areas where these incidents occurred, the bike racks, the gym, wherever else this has happened. And I want to know whether Mr. Daniels, the gym teacher my grandson reported this to in October, filed any incident report at all. Whitfield did not answer immediately, and that silence told me something I would come to understand much more fully over the following weeks. Mr. Daniels had not filed a report, Because somewhere in this building, an unspoken understanding had taken root that certain families were not worth the paperwork. "I'll be in touch," Whitfield said. "You'll be in touch today," I said. "Not next week. Today, my grandson is not going to spend one more day in a building where the adults responsible for his safety have decided his family's income determines how seriously his safety is taken." I stood, straightened my jacket, and looked at him directly. "I want to be very clear about one more thing, Mr. Whitfield. I am not a woman who makes threats she doesn't intend to follow through on. If I do not see meaningful action by the end of this week, a documented investigation, real consequences for Braxton Coleman's behavior, and a plan to ensure my grandson is safe on this campus, I will take this to the school board. And if the school board proves as unwilling to act as you have been so far, I will take it to the local news because I promise you, a story about a public school protecting a donor's son at the expense of a working family's child is exactly the kind of story people pay attention to. I have given this country 34 years of my life, making sure the people without power still had someone standing up for them. I am not going to stop now in a middle school over an 11-year-old boy's backpack." I turned and walked out of his office. Behind me, I heard him pick up his phone before I'd even reached the door. That was the first battle. It would not be the last, and it would not, as it turned out, be the hardest. 3 days passed after that meeting, and I heard nothing. So I did what I've always done when silence starts to feel deliberate. I went looking for the truth myself. By Thursday afternoon, 3 days after my visit to Whitfield's office, I had not heard a word from the school. No email, no phone call, no documented investigation, nothing. I had expected this. Men who run institutions on quiet favoritism rarely change course simply because someone in a uniform told them to. They wait. They hope the problem grows tired and goes away on its own. I have watched this exact strategy play out in Pentagon budget hearings, and I was not about to be outweighted by a middle school principal. So on Thursday evening, I drove to Rachel's apartment after her shift ended, and the three of us, Rachel, Tyler, and I, sat at her small kitchen table, and I asked Tyler to tell me everything again, from the very beginning, in as much detail as he could remember, not because I doubted him, because I needed a complete, dated record the same way I would have needed a complete incident timeline before taking any complaint up a chain of command. Tyler was nervous at first, worried he was in trouble, worried that talking about it more would make things worse. Rachel held his hand across the table and told him he wasn't in trouble, that none of this was his fault, that we needed his help to make sure it stopped happening to him or to anyone else. Slowly, carefully, he told us everything. It had started in September in gym class, when Braxton Coleman noticed Tyler's sneakers had a hole forming near the toe. Braxton had pointed it out loudly in front of the class and asked if Tyler's family could afford real shoes. Everyone laughed. Tyler said nothing, embarrassed, and hoped it would pass. It didn't pass. It became a pattern. Comments about his lunch. Tyler qualified for free lunch. And the cafeteria system, poorly designed, made that visible to other students at checkout. Something I would later learn the district had been warned about repeatedly and never fixed. Comments about his jacket, which had come from a donation, closet at our church after his old one wore through at the elbows. Comments about the fact that he got dropped off by his grandmother in an older sedan instead of picked up by a parent in one of the newer SUVs that lined the pickup lane. In October, after a particularly bad week where Braxton and two friends had cornered Tyler by the lockers and taken his lunch money, Tyler had gone to Mr. Daniels, the gym teacher, because Mr. Daniels was the only adult at Ridgemont he felt comfortable talking to. Mr. Daniels had told him he'd look into it. Nothing had changed. Rachel's email, complaint that same week had received, the form response, and no further contact. By November, Tyler told us, he had mostly stopped trying to tell anyone because it hadn't worked, and because Braxton had told him quite directly that nobody's going to believe a scholarship kid over me, which was a strange and telling phrase for an 11-year-old to have absorbed and repeated with such confidence, the language of someone who had hurt adults in his own life. discuss exactly that dynamic. By the time Tyler finished talking, it was nearly 9 at night, and Rachel had tears running silently down her face. The particular exhausted grief of a parent, realizing her child had been carrying something alone for months while she was working, nights to keep a roof over both their heads. I wrote down every date Tyler could remember, every name, every detail. In the same methodical way, I had once documented supply chain failures that put soldiers at risk. By the time I left that night, I had 6 months of pattern, laid out in careful handwriting on 4 pages of legal paper, and I had something else too, a plan for what would happen if Whitfield continued to stall. By Friday, with still no word from the school, I made 2 more calls that changed the shape of everything. Friday morning, having heard nothing further from Whitfield, I called the Ashford Hills School District office and requested to be added to the public comment section of the next school board meeting, which fortunately was scheduled for the following Tuesday. I also did something else. I called an old friend, Colonel Renata Ford, retired like me, after 30 years in the Army Judge Advocate General's Corps, meaning she had spent 3 decades as a military lawyer, much of it dealing with exactly the kind of institutional cover-up I now suspected was happening at Ridgemont. Renata and I had served together twice, once in Germany and once stateside, and there was no one whose judgment I trusted more. I called her Friday evening and explained everything. "Eleanor," she said once I'd finished, "this isn't just a bullying problem. If what you're describing is accurate, a documented complaint that was ignored, a teacher who didn't file a mandatory incident report, a pattern of favoritism tied to a donor family, you may be looking at a Title IX or equal protection issue. Depending on how the district's own policies are written, public schools have legal obligations. Here that go well beyond, 'Let's have an informal conversation.' I want it done right," I told her. "I don't want to burn the school down. I want them to actually protect the kids in that building. All of them, not just the ones whose parents wrote a check. Then you need documentation, which it sounds like you already have. And you need to make your first move public enough that quietly, making the problem disappear stops being an option for them. A school board meeting, with public comment, on the record, is exactly the right venue. Would you like me to draft something with you?" We spent 2 hours on the phone that night. By the time we hung up, I had a 3-minute public comment written, tight and precise, citing the specific dates, the specific failures, and the specific question I intended to ask the board directly, in public on the record. Why had a documented complaint about a child's safety gone unanswered for 4 months? And what policy, if any, governed how incidents involving major donor families were handled differently from incidents involving other students? I did not sleep well that weekend either, but by Tuesday morning I was ready. Then, the day before the school board meeting, my phone rang, and the person on the other end changed everything I thought I understood. Monday afternoon, the day before the school board meeting, something happened that I had not anticipated, and it changed the entire shape of what came next. My phone rang. An unfamiliar number, local area code. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. "Is this Mrs. I'm sorry, General Hargrove?" "Speaking." "My name is Patricia Nguyen. I'm a para-educator at Ridgemont. I work with the special education department, and I got your number from a friend of mine, Grace Daniels. She's married to Coach Daniels, the gym teacher." I sat down slowly at my kitchen table. "Go on." "I heard about what happened. What you said to Whitfield on Monday. It's all over the staff group chat. Actually, which I probably shouldn't tell you, but I think you should know that a lot of us have been waiting a long time for someone to say what you said out loud." Over the next 20 minutes, Patricia told me things that reframed everything I thought I understood about Ridgemont Middle School. She told me that Coach Daniels had, in fact, filed an incident report back in October, a real one on the correct form, describing what Tyler had told him about Braxton and his friends. She told me that report had gone to the assistant principal's office and, as far as she and several other staff members could tell, had simply never been forwarded to Whitfield's office or entered into the district's formal tracking system. She told me this was not the first time something like this had happened. 2 years earlier, a different student, a girl named Amara, whose family had recently immigrated and did not speak fluent English, had been targeted by a group of students, including again Braxton Coleman, and that complaint too had quietly disappeared without documented action. Amara's family had eventually pulled her out of Ridgemont entirely and enrolled her in a school 2 districts over, a 40-minute drive each way, because they didn't trust the school to protect her and didn't have the resources to fight it the way I clearly intended to. Marcus Coleman gave the district almost $500,000 over the last 6 years, Patricia told me. The gym, new scoreboards. He funded a portion of the renovation for the front office. Whitfield's job security is basically tied to keeping the Colemans happy. And I think everybody just learned to look the other way, because nobody wanted to be the person who lost the school its biggest donor. Would you be willing to say any of this in writing? I asked. Or in front of the school board? There was a long pause. I could lose my job. I understand that risk completely, and I would never ask you to take it lightly. But I want you to understand something too. Somewhere in that building right now, there is probably another Tyler, another Amara, a child whose family doesn't have the time, the resources, or in my case, 34 years of institutional experience, to fight this the way I'm about to. If people who know the truth stay quiet because it's safer, nothing changes for that child either. Patricia was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, Coach Daniels kept a copy of the original report on his own computer. He was worried something like this might happen, that it would get buried. He'll send it to you tonight. Thank you, Patricia. Truly. Don't thank me yet, she said. I'll thank me if this actually changes something. Tuesday night came. I want to tell you exactly what happened in that beige little conference room, because I've never been prouder of 3 minutes in my life. The Ashford Hills School Board met in a beige conference room attached to the district administration building, under fluorescent lighting that made everyone look slightly ill. 7 board members sat behind a long table at the front, a court reporter to one side taking minutes, and a small audience of maybe 30 parents scattered across folding chairs, most there for a routine budget discussion item scheduled earlier on the agenda. Rachel came with me. Tyler stayed with Bernard and Louise Coburn, our next-door neighbors, an older couple who had become close friends since I moved to Ashford Hills. Bernard, a retired firefighter. Louise, a retired school librarian who, as it turned out, had strong opinions of her own about how Ridgemont was run, and who had already promised to sit with me at the meeting if Rachel couldn't get off work in time. As it happened, Rachel had managed to trade shifts, and she sat beside me in the second row, her hands twisted together in her lap. I wore my uniform again. Some might call that theater. I call it strategy. When you need people to listen carefully to what you're about to say, and you have exactly 3 minutes to say it, you use every available tool to make sure the room is paying attention from the first word. When the public comment portion of the meeting arrived, the board president called my name. I stood, walked to the small podium set up at the front of the room, and set my 3 pages of notes and Coach Daniels' original incident report down in front of me. My name is Eleanor Hargrove. I am a retired Major General, United States Army, and I am the grandmother of an 11-year-old boy named Tyler, currently enrolled in the 6th grade at Ridgemont Middle School. I saw a few board members glance up from their laptops. On March the 4th, my grandson came home with mud in his hair, his backpack destroyed, and told me for the first time that he had been physically and verbally targeted for 6 months by another student because his family does not have money. I later learned this was reported, correctly on the proper form, by a Ridgemont staff member in October of last year. That report never reached Principal Whitfield's office, was never entered into the district's tracking system, and no disciplinary action was ever taken. I held up the copy of Coach Daniels' report. I have a copy of that report with me tonight. I would like it entered into the record. A murmur moved through the room. One of the board members, a woman near the end of the table, leaned forward. I visited Principal Whitfield in person 4 days ago, I continued. I was told informally that Braxton Coleman, the student responsible, had received nothing beyond an informal conversation with his parents, despite a documented 6-month pattern of behavior. I was also told in that same meeting that the school did not want to make this bigger than it needs to be, in reference to a report that this donor family had, in fact, funded a significant portion of this district's facilities. I let that sentence sit for a moment before continuing. I am not here tonight to attack Ridgemont Middle School. I spent 34 years defending institutions I believed in, even when they had flaws, because I believed they were worth fixing rather than abandoning. I am here because I have reason to believe this is not an isolated incident. I have spoken with a staff member who described a similar pattern 2 years ago, involving a different student, whose family ultimately withdrew her from this district entirely rather than continue fighting for her safety. Another murmur, louder this time. I saw Whitfield, seated in the third row along the side wall, go rigid in his chair. I am asking this board 3 things tonight, on the record. First, a full, independent investigation into how incident reports involving students are tracked, and specifically why this one disappeared for 4 months. Second, a review of any pattern connecting disciplinary outcomes to donor relationships within this district. Because if that pattern exists, parents in this community deserve to know it. And third, a public commitment that my grandson and every other child in this district will be protected based on what happens to them, not based on what their family can afford to give. I looked directly at the board president as I said my final line. I did not spend 3 decades in uniform to come home and discover that in this country, in this town, a child's safety is negotiable if the right family writes a big enough check. I don't intend to let that stand quietly. Thank you? I stepped back from the podium. The room was very still for a moment, and then the board president cleared his throat. General Hargrove, thank you for that comment. Given the seriousness of what you've described and the documentation you've provided, I'd like to propose we move this to executive session for immediate discussion, and I'd like our superintendent to open a formal investigation, effective tonight. Several board members nodded. One, a younger woman, I would later learn was newly elected and had run partly on a platform of district transparency, spoke up. I want to second that, and I want to add, I think we need to ask hard questions about whether donor relationships have influenced disciplinary decisions in this district before. This isn't the first time I've heard concerns like this, informally, and I think we've been too slow to take them seriously. I sat back down beside Rachel, whose hand found mine and gripped it tightly. Whitfield did not look at either of us as he was called, along with the superintendent, into a side room for what I understood would be a very uncomfortable conversation. That was Tuesday. What happened over the following 2 weeks would surprise even me. 3 days after that meeting, a black SUV pulled into my driveway, and I opened my door before he could even knock. I did not expect Braxton's father to come to my house, but 3 days after the school board meeting, on a Friday evening, a black SUV pulled into my driveway, and a tall man in an expensive coat got out and walked up to my front door. I opened it before he could knock. General Hargrove, he said. My name is Marcus Coleman. I believe you know my son. I know what your son has been doing to my grandson for 6 months, I said. Would you like to come in, or would you rather have this conversation on my porch? He hesitated, clearly having expected either hostility or intimidation, and gotten neither, just a flat, unwavering directness that seemed to throw him slightly off balance. Inside would be fine, he said. I made coffee because I believe even difficult conversations deserve some basic civility, and we sat at my kitchen table. I want to start by saying I had no idea the extent of this, Marcus Coleman said. The school called me in October, told me there'd been some kind of misunderstanding between Braxton and another student, and that it had been handled. I believed them. Did you ask what handled meant? He paused. No, I didn't. Mr. Coleman, I'm going to tell you something, and I want you to actually hear it, because I don't think anyone has said it to you plainly before. Your donations built that gymnasium. That's a generous thing, and I'm not here to condemn generosity. But somewhere along the way, this district decided your generosity meant your son didn't have to face consequences the way other children do. That's not a gift to your family. That's a trap, because right now, your son believes he is untouchable. And I promise you, a boy who grows up believing that does not turn into a healthy adult. He turns into someone who never learns that actions have consequences. And eventually, the world outside. Ridgemont Middle School is going to teach him that lesson in a much harsher way than I'm teaching it to you tonight. Marcus Coleman was quiet for a long time, staring into his coffee cup. "I've been so focused on giving him everything I never had," he finally said. "I grew up without much. I promised myself my kid would never feel that. I think somewhere along the way, I forgot to teach him the other half of what matters." "It's not too late," I said. "But it starts with you, not with the school. Braxton needs to apologize to my grandson, genuinely. Not because a principal told him to, but because he understands what he did was wrong, and he needs real consequences at home that have nothing to do with what the school does or doesn't enforce." Marcus Coleman looked up at me. "What do you want from the school?" "Whitfield told me you're pushing for a full investigation. My name's going to come up in that. It could look like I bought my son's way out of trouble." "I want the truth to come up," I said. "I'm not interested in punishing you for donating to a school. I'm interested in a system that stopped protecting children the moment protecting them became inconvenient for the people funding it. If the truth makes you uncomfortable, Mr. Coleman, I'd respectfully suggest that discomfort is worth sitting with." He nodded slowly. "Braxton will apologize, and I'll cooperate with whatever investigation the board opens fully, whatever they find." He stood to leave, then paused at my door. "For what it's worth, General, I respect what you did. Most people would have just transferred their grandson to a different school and let it go. Most people don't have 34 years of experience refusing to let things go," I said. "That's the whole point. The district's investigation took 3 more weeks, and when it finally landed, it confirmed everything and then some. The district's investigation, conducted over the following 3 weeks by an outside firm the board hired specifically because several members no longer trusted internal review, uncovered exactly what Patricia Nguyen had described and more. Coach Daniels's October report had, in fact, been received by the assistant principal's office and never forwarded. When investigators asked why, the assistant principal, a man named Curtis Reyes, no relation to Tyler, admitted under direct questioning that Whitfield had instructed him verbally, months earlier, to handle anything involving the Coleman family personally, quietly, without going through the normal channels, a phrase that made its way into the final investigative report almost word for word. The investigation also confirmed the earlier incident involving Amara, the student who had transferred out 2 years prior. Her family was contacted, at their request as part of the review, and her mother provided a written statement describing months of unaddressed harassment strikingly similar to what Tyler had endured. 2 other smaller incidents surfaced as well, nothing as severe, but each one involving a family without significant financial ties to the district, and each one handled with less urgency than incidents involving students from wealthier, more connected families. The final report was blunt. It found that Ridgemont Middle School, under Whitfield's leadership, had developed an informal but consistent practice of minimizing disciplinary consequences for students from families with significant financial ties to the district, while pursuing normal disciplinary procedures for other students. It specifically cited the failure to escalate Tyler's case, despite a properly filed report, as a serious breach of the district's own written policy on student safety. Gerald Whitfield resigned 2 weeks after the report was released. Before the board could formally vote on his termination, Curtis Reyes was placed on administrative leave pending further review. The district announced a new, independent reporting system for all incidents involving student safety with mandatory board notification. For any complaint left unresolved after 14 days, a policy that came to be known, informally among the staff, as Hargrove's Rule, though I never asked for it to be named after me, and told several people, somewhat uncomfortably, that I would have preferred it just be called good practice. 2 weeks after Whitfield resigned, I got a phone call I hadn't expected, and it led to an afternoon I'll never forget. 2 weeks after Whitfield's resignation, Marcus Coleman called me and asked whether Braxton could speak with Tyler directly. Not through the school, not as part of any disciplinary requirement the district's new interim principal, a woman named Dr. Patricia Suarez, who had been brought in from a neighboring district, specifically to rebuild trust, had already handled the formal side of things, with a documented consequence for Braxton that included suspension, mandatory counseling, and a restorative justice process. This request from Marcus was separate, personal. "I don't want to force it," Marcus told me on the phone. "If Tyler doesn't want to see him, I understand completely." But Braxton asked, genuinely asked, "I think he needs to say it himself." I talked to Tyler about it that evening. He was quiet for a long time, turning the idea over the way he turned over the broken radios and clocks. He liked to fix carefully, checking every angle before deciding what to do with it. "I don't know if I believe him," Tyler finally said. "What if he's just saying sorry because his dad's making him?" "That's a fair thing to wonder," I told him. "You don't have to decide right now whether you believe him. You just have to decide whether you want to hear what he has to say. Those are two different things, and only one of them is up to you today." Tyler thought about it and said he'd try. We met at a neutral location, a small park near the community center, on a Saturday afternoon with Marcus and Braxton on one side, and Rachel, Tyler, and me on the other. It was, I'll admit, an unusual scene. A 2-star general standing in a public park, watching an 11-year-old boy work up the courage to apologize to another 11-year-old boy, while both sets of adults stood a careful, respectful distance apart. Braxton walked over first, hands shoved in his jacket pockets, eyes down. He was smaller than I'd pictured him. Somehow, not the imposing figure Tyler's stories had built in my mind. Just a kid, uncertain and a little scared. "Hey," Braxton said. "Hey," Tyler said back, guarded. There was a long, awkward silence. Then Braxton took a breath and said in a rush, like he'd rehearsed it and was afraid of losing his nerve halfway through, "I'm sorry. For everything. The shoes thing, and the lunch thing, and pushing you by the bike racks. I don't even really know why I did it. I think I just wanted people to laugh, and it was easier when it wasn't me they were laughing at. That's not an excuse. I know it's not. I just wanted you to know I know it was wrong, and I'm sorry, and I'm not going to do it anymore. Not to you, not to anybody." Tyler studied him for a moment. "You really got suspended?" "Yeah, 2 weeks. And I have to go to counseling, and I have to write, like, an essay every week about empathy, which sounds dumb, but honestly it's kind of made me think about stuff." Despite himself, Tyler almost smiled. "That does sound dumb." "It's so dumb," Braxton agreed, and something in his voice cracked slightly with relief, like he hadn't expected anything close to a normal conversation to be possible. They talked for a while longer, awkwardly at first, then a little easier. The particular resilience children have that allows them to find their way back towards something ordinary even after something painful. I don't know if they became friends exactly. That would be a tidier ending than real life usually offers. And I promised you the truth, not a tidier version of it. But by the end of that afternoon, Braxton was showing Tyler something on his phone, and Tyler was laughing at whatever it was. And Rachel caught my eye across the park with an expression of quiet, exhausted relief that I understood completely because I felt it too. "Thank you," Marcus said to me quietly as the boys talked. I don't think he would have found his, way to that apology without everything that happened. I'm not glad it happened, but I am glad about who he's starting to become because of it. That's the only kind of good that ever comes out of something like this, I told him. Not that it happened, just what people choose to do afterward. But I don't want to leave you there, in a park, on one good afternoon. I want to tell you what an ordinary Tuesday looks like now, 3 months later, because I think it matters just as much. I want to tell you what an ordinary Tuesday looks like now, 3 months later, because I think it matters as much as anything else in this story. Tyler still lives with me on weekdays while Rachel works. He still comes home from Ridgemont Middle School, under Dr. Suarez's leadership, now a very different building than it was under Whitfield, though it took real, sustained effort from staff, parents, and the board to get there. He still takes apart old radios and puts them back together on my kitchen table, sawdust and small screws scattered across a towel. I've given up trying to keep clean, but he talks now. That's the difference that matters most. He tells me about his day without me having to pry it out of him one careful question at a time. He tells me when something's wrong before it's had 6 months to grow into something unbearable. He has 2 new friends from his class, boys named Marcus, a different Marcus, no relation, and David, who come over some afternoons and help him with whatever broken appliance he's currently rebuilding. And I make them all snacks and listen to them, argue about video games, with the particular joy of someone who has spent a long career around very serious, very high-stakes conversations, and who now gets to spend her retirement listening to 11-year-olds debate the merits of different game characters instead. Rachel still works hard. That part of our life hasn't changed. And I won't pretend a school board investigation solved every problem we face. She's still tired most days. She still counts every dollar. But something in her has settled that wasn't settled before, the particular exhaustion of a mother who doesn't trust the people responsible for her child's safety is a different, heavier kind of tired than ordinary exhaustion, and that weight at least has lifted. Dr. Suarez, the interim principal, made a point of calling me personally about a month into her tenure, just to check in, which I mention only because it illustrates exactly the kind of leadership that had been missing before. I wanted you to know, she told me. We've implemented mandatory incident tracking with board-level visibility for anything unresolved after 2 weeks. We've also started an anonymous reporting line specifically for students, because one of the things this investigation made clear is that kids like Tyler often don't have the words or the confidence to escalate a problem through normal channels, especially when the person targeting them seems to have institutional protection. We're trying to build a school where that protection doesn't exist for anyone, regardless of what their family can afford to give. That's all I ever wanted, I told her. Not punishment. Just a level floor. Coach Daniel still teaches gym at Ridgemont, and I understand he's become something of an informal mentor to several students who've had difficult years, including, somewhat remarkably, Braxton, who apparently asked to be on Daniels' intramural team specifically, which Daniels agreed to on the condition that Braxton help coach the younger kids, an assignment that seems to be teaching him more about responsibility than any classroom lecture could. Patricia Nguyen kept her job. In fact, she was promoted, brought onto a new district committee, reviewing equity and disciplinary practices across all the schools in Ashford Hills, not just Ridgemont. She sent me a card a few weeks ago that simply said, "Thank you for making it safe to tell the truth." I keep it on my refrigerator. So here I am now, 68 years old, sitting at my own kitchen table, thinking about everything I've just told you, and I want to leave you with what I actually learned from all of it. I am 68 years old. I spent 34 years in the United States Army, and I genuinely believed by the time I retired that I understood most of what there was to understand about power, about institutions, about the particular courage it takes to stand in a room and tell people in charge something they don't want to hear. I learned something new anyway, watching my grandson come home with wet shoes and a torn backpack, refusing to tell me why. I learned that the hardest battles are not always the ones fought overseas, in briefings, under fire, with stakes measured in strategic objectives and lives. Sometimes the hardest battle is a quiet Tuesday afternoon, sitting on the edge of an 11-year-old's bed, trying to get him to trust that telling the truth won't make things worse. Because somewhere along the way, an institution that was supposed to protect him had already taught him otherwise. I learned that rank and uniform in 34 years of service can open a door that might otherwise stay closed. And I am not too proud to admit I used every bit of that leverage deliberately, because I understood something about the man on the other side of that desk that I don't think he understood about himself. He responded to power, not to reason, and I needed him to listen before I could ever hope to reach the part of him capable of doing what was right. But I also learned that the uniform was never really the point. It got me through the door. What mattered after that was what Tyler taught me, without meaning to, that a child's dignity is not a negotiable line item, not something to be weighed against a donation, not something a family's income should ever determine the value of. Every child who walks into a public school in this country is owed the exact same floor of safety, and respect. And any adult who forgets that, whatever their reasons, has forgotten the entire point of the job. Tyler asked me something last week, sitting at my kitchen table while he rewired an old lamp he'd found at a garage sale. "Grandma, were you scared? Going into Whitfield's office like that?" I thought about it honestly before I answered, because I try never to give him an easy answer when a true one is available. "A little," I told him. "Not scared the way you were scared, telling me what happened. A different kind. I was scared it wouldn't work. That I'd walk in there, say everything I needed to say, and it still wouldn't be enough to make them see you the way I see you. But it worked. It worked because a lot of people were brave, not just me. You were brave, telling me the truth even though you were scared it would make things worse. Coach Daniels was brave, keeping that report even though it could have cost him his job. Patricia was brave, calling me even though she was scared too. Even Braxton's father was brave, showing up at our door and admitting he'd gotten something wrong. Courage isn't usually one big dramatic moment. Tyler. Usually it's a lot of ordinary people on ordinary days, deciding to tell the truth even when it's easier not to. He nodded slowly, turning that over the way he turns over everything, and went back to his lamp. And I sat there and watched him work, this steady, thoughtful boy who had somehow found his way back to himself. And I thought about how strange and quietly enormous it is. The difference one person choosing to show up can make. I don't regret walking into that school in uniform. I don't regret the school board meeting, or the pages of notes, or the uncomfortable conversation with Marcus Coleman at my kitchen table. I would do every bit of it again, exactly the same way, without hesitation. But if you take one thing from this story, let it not be the uniform or the stars on my shoulder, or the particular satisfaction of watching a man like Gerald Whitfield finally face consequences for choices he'd made, comfortable peace with for 11 years. Let it be this instead. Pay attention to the quiet ones. The kids who come home and go straight to their rooms. The ones who say nothing a little too fast when you ask what's wrong. The ones who have already, somewhere along the way, learned that telling the truth doesn't always help, and have decided it's safer to carry the weight alone. They are not choosing silence because nothing is wrong. They are choosing it because somewhere, someone taught them that speaking up costs more than it's worth. Your job, whether you have 2 stars on your shoulder or none at all, whether you're a grandmother, a parent, a teacher, or simply a neighbor who notices a child walking home a little too quietly, is to make sure that lesson gets undone, to make it safe again to tell the truth. To be, for at least one child, the adult who shows up, asks the second question after the first one gets a shrug, and refuses to leave the room until the truth comes out. That's not really a story about a lottery ticket, or a lawsuit, or a dramatic reveal in a mediation room. It's a much smaller story than that in the end. It's just about a boy with wet shoes, and a grandmother who decided that whatever it cost her, she was going to make sure someone was finally listening. If you're facing something like this, a school, a workplace, any institution that has decided your family's voice matters less because of what you don't have, know this. You are allowed to make noise. You are allowed to use whatever standing you've earned, whatever credibility, whatever stubbornness you've built over a lifetime, and put it entirely in service of a child who cannot yet fight these battles alone. I spent 34 years defending this country in uniform. It turned out one of the most important things I ever did with that uniform was hang it back in the closet, then take it out one more time, put it on and walk into a principal's office to defend a boy who just wanted someone to believe him. I'd do it again tomorrow. I'd do it every day for the rest of my life if that's what it took. Tyler still has that jacket. By the way, the one from the church closet, the one Braxton mocked back in September. He wears it sometimes, not because he has to anymore, but because, as he told me a few weeks ago, almost shy about admitting it, it doesn't feel like a bad thing anymore. It just feels like my jacket. That, I think, is the whole story, distilled down to a single sentence. Not a lawsuit won, not a principal removed from his post, not even the apology in the park. Just a boy who got his jacket back, not the fabric itself, but the simple, ordinary right to wear it without shame. Some victories don't come with a courtroom or a headline. Some of them look exactly like that. A boy, in his own jacket, walking into his own school, without flinching. That's enough for me. It always was.